welcome to our show. Today I'm going to talk about Tsukamoto's Tokyo Fist. Now this was Shinya Tsukamoto's film that he kind of followed the Tetsuo duo with. I mean, he did Tetsuo 1 and 2, and then he moved away from the more obvious body horror, the more obvious Cronenberg influenced horror with this one. He never really went back after that, apart from Tetsuo the Bullet Man, and even then it was an adaptation of his original themes. Because this was when this was one of the films he made as he adapted, the same way Cronenberg adapted, to be honest, in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, Cronenberg adapted. It became less body horror and more about the effects of that and the psychology of people and things. It became a lot more subtle about it. He was always subtle, I mean, Cronenberg. And so is Sakamoto. Sakamoto was more primal than Cronenberg. But this was kind of the big step forward away from the obvious shots that were very Sam Raimi influenced. Because he was Cronenberg, but he also had a lot of Sam Raimi in him as well. Here, the style's still hyper, but the situation is more realistic. So so even the hyper style feels like an extension of someone's psychology, rather than like the obvious body horror stuff that he was doing before. So it was something a much more interesting take on his earlier obsessions. Now, Tokyo Fist is not one of my favourite Sakamoto films, but it is a very good one. It's one of those ones that's like, there are ones that I like a lot better than this, but this is still a very strong film. It was definitely an important film as he switched over. So the plot really is this kind of couple that are kind of the husband works and basically selling insurance and things, and he gets no respect from anyone he's working with. He's just as wimp in a society of other people who have the same problems and just try to struggle to make ends meet. He's married. He's getting married. His fiancée is this woman who's also works with corporate culture, and she's very much a similar situation to him, but seems to be a bit more. Has kept on to herself a bit more than he has. He seems to be losing his sense of himself. He wants to become part of this culture. And he wants her to stop working when they get married, and she also doesn't want it. She's got her own agenda she wants to follow. So there is this tension within them that they are not acknowledging. They are becoming this stereotypical couple the way that in Gemini the society glorifies this way of being. This is a new way of being within modern Japan. And it's just a stifling. It's like they're stuck within their politeness. They're not going to talk about stuff too much, which is becoming a problem because there's a lot of things boiling under the surface with them that are just out of control. So one day he goes to sell insurance in his boxing arena, and he runs into an old school buddy who he tries to avoid. He does not want to re-establish the friendship at all. They just went in different directions, but now this person seems to be obsessed by him and obsessed by his family unit is set up in a way that's interesting because it's never fully clarified what it's about. There's so many areas you can go into to see what it's about this and that, but it never specifies in a reductive way. It's always about the complexity of this. It's always this feeling. It's a thing where you're not quite sure if even they know what it's about ultimately. It's just that they've got a past which starts to get revealed as time goes on. But even this past is complicated and it's tied into the flaws of character. Because these people try and present themselves as together, to be like they have a place in society and they're good at it. And then you find out they're not that good at what they're doing. And they're a bit dysfunctional, but they wouldn't admit it themselves or to other people. So this person visits them and ends up visiting the apartment one time when our main character is away, and they just the fiance's there, and they end up kissing each other and stuff, and an affair starts to. They start to go towards an affair, the man finds out, he starts to feel very let down, and his temper starts to show. And there's a great scene in a restaurant where he goes from trying to be going from polite to normal person and calling her a bitch and a hooer in front of everybody. It's really funny because he's no control himself, and he keeps on trying to drag her back, and then he ruins it again. And the thing is, why does she not leave after the first time? It's because she's got her own little psychological kinks that keeps her going back and then rejecting it. Then she goes between one and the other, and it's whatever one can, what each one can do for her as she tries to work herself out. But she doesn't have any respect for either of them. Basically, it's like they're kind of like um, they're kind of what's there to mirror her process as she starts getting into piercings and do tattoos. She starts to go through different periods of getting tattoos, then getting rid of the tattoos, piercings, then getting rid of the piercings, and eventually into violence and punching the hell out of her ex-lover. Anyway, it's this thing of she's kind of trying to discover herself. She needs the pain to feel alive, but she doesn't understand it. And she tries to have this potential. She does understand it a lot more than she actually does. Just the same way as the boxer tries to have this pretense of he knows why he's doing all these things, and he doesn't really. He's out of control completely. He just doesn't understand it. He's a boxer who's also viewed as a bit of a coward and a bit of a has-been by most people around him. Some people think he's got the talent and got the ability to move on, but it's all tied to the weird kinks he's got in psychology. It's like he's always he can never really go for what he wants ever because he doesn't really understand himself. And some of the boxers understand that he's not going to deliver. He's just not there. And the businessman starts to learn to box because after he's been cucked, basically he decides to learn to box. So he starts off, and that's played by Sakamoto himself. He gives himself the part that's most demeaning. He starts off this total wimp, and he starts learning how to box and learn how to defend himself. He starts getting quite good, but he's never going to be that good. He's just learning the basics, and but he does have anger. He does hate this guy. He does hate the fact that the guy came back and brings up stuff from his past. But this dead woman that's killed by this gang of people, and they vow to revenge this woman. Then the cops found who did it and put the guys in jail. And we're going to wait till the guys get out of jail and beat them, kill them basically. And then life happened and moved apart. And then neither of them have quite come to grips with that. And one of them suppressed and one of them's obsessed by it. They haven't come to grips with it. So what do they actually want from this? What's the motivation factor? And it all becomes like, what's the motivating factor for anybody? It's like, you think you know what you want, but you don't. You're kind of an animal, and you're kind of strange and weird, and you don't really have full control over what you're really about. And that's kind of what the film feels like. It's about people who kind of know what they want, but not quite. And the romantic scene between Sakamoto and his ex-fiancée, ex-lover, current source of obsession, is a scene where they beat the hell out of each other in a parking lot. And they seem to find some weird satisfaction in that. I mean, like, Cronenberg's Crash get a lot of shit, and this film just passed by without any problems, and it was like, nowadays this would have been really controversial. But it's a consenting thing. She wants and he wants, and it's like this weird dynamic. It's that they don't quite understand themselves, and it's fascinating to watch. That's the whole thing. Is the whole film's fascinating to watch with these people who are fighting their own instincts and not quite sure why they're fighting their own instincts, and not quite sure what they want from life, and it's all about all those things that are bubbling on the surface that you can never quite qualify properly, and you're never quite sure why they're driving you. That's what this film feels like a lot of the time. It is quite short. The style of it is very much like Sakamoto, the early period, where there's a lot of cuts and a lot of imagery that's almost inside the head. And it's almost like a person learning to either suffer through pain or developing from pain, but not quite sure why they're doing it, they're just doing it. So it's a wonderful film. It just isn't, for me, isn't as good as some of his later stuff. But that's just because his later stuff's so good. This is still wonderful. This is still a great film. I highly recommend, so go watch it. Right, that's me for now. Hope you enjoyed this.